Martin Luther. You know the name. The man who basically broke medieval Christianity in half, translated the Bible for everyone, and stared down the most powerful emperor in the world. We think of him as this huge, almost larger-than-life historical figure. But behind that public revolutionary, there was a private man. And that man did something that, in its own way, was just as radical as nailing those theses to the church door. He got married. So let's get into it.
Right, because this wasn't just any marriage. We're talking about the union of a runaway nun and an ex-monk who was pretty much convinced he was going to be burned at the stake for heresy any day now. So how in the world did that happen? What could possibly change the mind of the man who literally started the Protestant Reformation?
To really get how shocking Luther's marriage was, you've got to understand where he was coming from. He had zero, and I mean zero, intention of ever getting married. It wasn't even a blip on his radar.
I mean, listen to this. This was his actual reaction when he heard that other priests and monks were starting to get married. It was like he was saying, wow, good for them, but they're not going to rope me into that. After all, this was a guy who fully expected, in his own words, the death of a heretic. Marriage was the absolute last thing on his mind.
So, what could possibly flip that switch? Well, it all kicks off with something straight out of an adventure novel. A dramatic, life-or-death escape involving, of all things, herring barrels.
Okay, so here's the breakdown. A group of nuns, fired up by Luther's writings, decide they want out of the convent. They write to him for help, and he feels responsible, so he cooks up this secret rescue mission. And this was no joke. Abducting nuns was a capital offense, a crime punishable by death. He gets this merchant, Leonard Kopp, to sneak 12 of them out of the convent in the middle of the night, hidden in the back of his wagon among a bunch of smelly, empty fish barrels.
And when this wagon finally rolls into Wittenberg, well, this quote from a local student just perfectly captures the whole crazy scene. The shock, the gossip, but also the reality of the situation. All of a sudden, Martin Luther is in charge of finding homes, jobs, or, husbands for a dozen runaway nuns. And that feeling of responsibility is what's going to push Luther to make a decision that nobody saw coming, least of all him. But this wasn't about finding love, it was about making a statement.
So over the next couple of years, Luther manages to get all the women settled. All of them except one, a very determined, sharp, and noble-born woman named Catherine von Bora. By now she's 26, which was practically past marrying age back then, and her future is looking pretty uncertain.
So Luther tries to set her up with someone, and she is not having it. Instead, Catherine does something unbelievably bold. She sends a message back to Luther through a friend, and it's basically an ultimatum. She says, look, I'll marry your friend Dr. Amsdorf, or I'll marry you, but that's it. Those are my options. Can you imagine the guts it took for a woman to do that in the 1500s? So when Luther actually considers this wild proposal, his reasons are anything but romantic. Seriously, first, he wanted to make his dad happy, who'd always wanted grandchildren. Second, he thought it would be a great way to, and I quote, spite the Pope and the devil. And third, because he was convinced he was going to be executed soon, he wanted to leave Catherine with the protected legal status of his widow. He was super clear about this. He wasn't swept up in some passionate love affair. This was a marriage of duty and principle. He respected Catherine, he cared for her, but as he said, he was not infatuated. For him, it was about sealing his witness to his own theology.
But here's the funny thing. This marriage of convenience, it almost immediately turned into this incredible, dynamic partnership. Martin Luther, the man shaking the foundations of the world, had totally met his match. And her name was Catherine von Bora, or as he lovingly called her, my Lord Katie.
For a 42-year-old bachelor, married life brought some immediate adjustments. He once admitted that before he got married, his bed hadn't been made properly for an entire year. Katie put a stop to that real quick. And this quote just perfectly captures that sudden, very personal, and kind of funny change in his life.
And this really shows you their dynamic. On one hand, you have Martin, who was, let's be honest, just awful with money. He would give it away so freely that his own banker friend had to stop honoring his drafts. And on the other hand, you have Katie, who was an absolute powerhouse. She ran their enormous home, a former monastery, like a CEO. She was managing fields, livestock, a fish pond. She even brewed her own beer. That little PS on one of Luther's letters says everything you need to know. He tried to give something away, and he had to add, Katie's hid it. You can just hear the affection and the respect in the nicknames he gave her. He called her the boss of the pig market, the morning star of Wittenberg. He didn't just see her as a wife, he saw her as the incredibly competent master of their entire domestic world, and you can tell he totally admired her for it.
And together, they created something pretty amazing. Because their home wasn't just a home. It was basically a non-stop combination of a hotel, a university lecture hall, and a student dorm, all rolled into one.
I mean, get this. On any given night, there could be up to 25 people living under their roof. That's their own 6 kids, 4 orphans they adopted, various relatives, and a whole bunch of student boarders who were there just to soak up every word that fell from Luther's lips at the dinner table.
And what words they were. The students would literally write down everything he said, and these notes became famous as his table talk. And as you can tell from this quote, his opinions could be sharp, hilarious, and, well, very earthy.
But then, in the next breath, he would offer these incredibly profound insights that were literally changing the course of history. The conversation at that dinner table could bounce from the divine majesty of God to the price of pigs to the politics of the Pope, all in a single meal.
And it was through living this chaotic, demanding, wonderful home life that Luther's own ideas about marriage completely transformed. It became central to his theology.
So here's the big idea he landed on. He came to see marriage not just as, an alternative to celibacy, he saw it as a school for character. He started arguing that the monastery wasn't the best place to become a better Christian. The real training ground was the family, dealing with crying babies, worrying about money, and having to practice patience and forgiveness every single day.
And their family grew fast, 6 kids in just 8 years. And every child was a new lesson in that school. He once joked after a baby was crying for an hour straight. This is the sort of thing that has caused the church fathers to vilify marriage, but he truly came to believe that raising a family was a holy and noble work.
But that school also had moments of profound sorrow. The hardest trial they ever faced was when their daughter Magdalena died when she was only 13. And it's in this moment of absolute heartbreak that you see it. The marriage that started out a principle had grown into a deep, powerful love. He was completely devastated, writing that it was so strange to know she was at peace, and yet to be so sorrowful.
In the end, Luther's marriage wasn't some little side note to his Reformation. It was a living, breathing example of it. It created the model for the Protestant family and completely redefined the role of marriage in Christian life. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? For the people who changed the world, where does the real revolution actually begin? Out in the public square, or right there at the family dinner table?